Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be looking at the Spearhead update in the game of War Thunder. And first things first, the Spearhead update did add a number of new features to the game. One of the more interesting features was actually essentially an auto tracker, but for main battle tanks. Usually auto trackers are reserved for things like infantry fighting vehicles, but a few of the MBTs in the game did get it. I'll have a list of the vehicles related on screen, and I did do some testing with these various vehicles. What I ultimately found is that if you just have a tank firing sabos, one of the issues is that the targeting circle that is predicting where the shot should go is not entirely accurate, so a lot of the ranges that you're dealing with at top tier, it didn't really help out that much in a lot of situations, although it is certainly better than nothing. One thing I did decide to test out was the various Chinese tanks, both the MBT 2000, the VT4, and the ZTZ99 family, and ultimately these tanks do have a proximity fuse shell, so I was pretty optimistic that they would be pretty effective with it. However, it turns out the proxy fuse shell, the fuse on it is actually kind of wonky and tends to detonate way too early, and this resulted in a pretty consistent amount of hit markers, but not a consistent amount of damage. So certainly you can kill aircraft with these Chinese MBTs and their proxy fuse shells, but I found it wasn't terribly consistent. With that being said, when I saw the bottom of the list and I saw that the Merkava 3s and Merkava 4s got this feature, oh man, I had to test the most broken shell in the game, and it turns out this feature works incredibly well with that particular shell. So on the IFVs, when I was using the ahead rounds, I noticed that the auto tracker was essentially automatically fusing the ahead rounds so they would detonate at the appropriate distance. And so when I was putting two and two together, I thought to myself, wait a minute, is that going to work? Is it going to automatically fuse the time fuse shell? Oh, it does. It does automatically fuse the time fuse shell. So if you're not familiar with this specific shell, it's essentially a timed fuse semi-armor piercing bunker busting shell that behaves in a very weird fashion. I've included it in some videos in the past because it has this funny feature where you can kill any main battle tank in the game by hitting a road wheel, which is kind of hilarious. But it turns out it's also a time fuse shell. Now normally time fuse shells aren't that good against aircraft because by the time you laze, fire, and the shell gets there, the aircraft has already moved. Honestly, even if it's a helicopter, frequently it will have deviated enough so the shell doesn't really impact. However, if you're using the auto tracker, it automatically fuses the shell for the point of impact. So it is actually incredibly easy to pop planes and helicopters out of the sky with this particular shell, which is hilarious, especially because it's kind of low velocity, so it takes it a while to get there. In fact, if you actually want to test this feature for yourself, the ROM Seagull is a Merkava 3C. It has the shell and it has the auto tracker, so you can take that into the test drive and see how it works. In my opinion, it is incredibly fun and absolutely hilarious, and I definitely love this feature. Another new feature that was added this update was the ability to remove the Tusk kit from the Abrams, and I hate to be weird here, but I think the Gaijin made a mistake in America's favor for once because they actually had it remove just the ARAT kit and reduce the weight to the original weight, but they kept on the overbarrel 50 cal, and I'm pretty sure that's wrong. I'm pretty sure the overbarrel 50 cal and the gun shields for the commander and the loader are actually part of the Tusk kit and thus should also be removed. But for the time being, you can actually drop the ERA and still keep the overbarrel 50 cal, which is really nice. Another interesting addition that you're definitely going to notice if you go to top tier right now is the new BA-11 missiles that were added to the Z-10ME, and honestly I think these missiles push the Z-10ME over the top as the best helicopter in the game. You can carry up to 8 of the BA-11s, they're incredibly powerful and very consistent against basically everything. You also have 8 TY-90s, you also have a gun, you also have a radar, and more importantly you have LDIRCMs. I think the Z-10ME is making a very strong case for just straight up being the best helicopter that you can possibly get. On top of that, they also added another feature where you automatically get 5 free backups every day for whatever matches you choose, which is amazing. Not only can this allow you to, as a free-to-play player, more efficiently grind out upgrades for that critical vehicle, but it can also allow you to save some silver, because if you use a backup, you don't have to pay the repair cost for the original vehicle, so if you use the backup and then survive the match, you basically just saved yourself a bunch of silver as well. So this is just a fantastic feature all around for the free-to-play players, and even for more experienced players is incredibly good. And Gaijin also added this feature. Look, I just wanted to get the vehicle for a video. I didn't want to be called out like this, Gaijin. So essentially what they did was for the Senrai Maiden's vehicles, they actually changed the crew replenishment icon to match the character for the tank instead of just the generic crew replenishment. So while you're playing your vehicle, you just get to see a little anime girl sitting at you from the icon bar. At this point, it wouldn't really surprise me if they just went all in and actually did voice acting for each of these characters, especially because at this point I kind of suspect they're going to do this with more than one vehicle, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, another feature that they added, and one that you may or may not have heard about, is the ability to change the flag icons for the various nations in the various tech trees. Now, essentially how this works, or how I thought it would work when they originally announced it, was you could change the flag icons between the different eras for the nation. That is not how it works at all. How it works is that you can change the flag icon for a nation to the flag of any vehicle you have for that nation, even if it's just a random premium or event vehicle. So for example, because USA has the Iranian F-14 Tomcat, if you have that F-14 Tomcat, you can change the American flag to an Iranian flag, which is a very weird feature. I have no idea what this is intended to do, because it lets you change basically all of the nations to some pretty random other nations for basically no reason. Except there is one specific nation that you can't change to one specific other nation, and that's because they left out the nation of Taiwan. You cannot change the PRC flag into the ROC flag, which feels weirdly prudish to me, given that they will let you change the German flag to a Polish flag or the British flag to an Irish flag. Now, the ROC vehicles and also the nationalist Chinese vehicles from the World War II era make up about a good third to a quarter of the Chinese tech tree right now, so it is really weird that they won't let you change your flag to that, especially because this is something that only you as the player will ever see. It's not like other people in the lobby with you also see what you've changed these nations to. So it is very odd that they would specifically exclude Taiwan, and it's also pretty internally inconsistent. When you have essentially a sub-faction that makes up about a third to a quarter of an entire tech tree that's not allowed, but then one Iranian F-14 or one Irish coastal vessel is enough to change the entire nation's flag to that nation, it just doesn't really have any internal logic whatsoever. This also raises the question for me of, if the individuals from the PRC are so sensitive about the ROC, then why are all of the ROC vehicles in the PRC tech tree? There are a bunch of Taiwanese vehicles in that tech tree. There's even one that got added this update, and there's also the Abrams that's going to be coming further down the line, or at least Gaijin has heavily hinted at it. So why are we still adding ROC vehicles to the PRC tech tree? Why don't we just put them somewhere else if the PRC don't like being associated with them? The whole thing just feels like a have your cake and eat it too scenario, where they want to have all of the ROC vehicles, but they don't actually want the ROC flag. If I'm being honest, this whole thing just strikes me as something that is suitable for trolling and little else, and when Gaijin announced it, it was the equivalent of Gaijin announcing they were going to release a jar of live bees in their own office. They can certainly do it if they want, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere positive. Of course, there is a flip side to this feature, and this is an aspect that I'm not entirely clear on why they put it in, because it actually has its own set of problems, and that is, when you are in a match, it will display the flags for the vehicles in that match for both teams in real time. So as vehicles are destroyed and or respawned, it will update or remove flags. The reason why I'm kind of iffy on this, and I'll show it in the background with an RRB match at 12.7, and you can clearly see this in this specific match. I'm going to pause the game right here, and you can also, for the RRB aficionados, pause it right here. Look at the flags at the top of the screen and tell me what planes are on each team. So looking at my team, not even looking at the aircraft, just looking at the flags, we have an Indian flag, so that's going to be the Bizon. We have a Swiss flag, so that's going to be an F-18C. We have a Canadian flag, that will be the CF-188. We have a Belgian flag, so that's the F-16AM. We have a Colombian flag, so that's going to be the Kafir C-10. We also have a East German flag, so that's going to be the MiG-29, possibly a MiG-23, but more likely the MiG-29. And obviously on the enemy team, we have an Iranian flag, so that's going to be an F-14. So obviously the problem here is is that depending on which specific flags you see, it's actually pretty easy to tell not just what types of vehicles are on the enemy team, but often the exact model of vehicle on the enemy team, especially when you start dealing with some of the minor nations. But even in one example, I was playing USA ground at 5.7 and I saw a modern Bundeswehr flag on the enemy team instead of the Wehrmacht flag, and I thought, oh, there's no way that's not an M41, because that's basically the only Bundeswehr vehicle around this battle rating, and spoiler, it was an M41. So you do get a lot more information than you used to because of this system, and because it updates in real time, if there's only a handful of players on both teams, depending on how unique of a vehicle they spawn, you could easily be able to figure out exactly what the enemy team comp is at any given time. This is especially true when there's exactly one vehicle for a given nation, like Colombia, Venezuela. You also have the Vilkas, which I've featured in a few of my videos. It's the only Lithuanian vehicle in the game, so if somebody sees a Lithuanian flag, you're definitely in a Vilkas, stuff of that nature. Now, a long time ago, there used to be a system where if you were within a certain radius of an enemy, you would actually start getting score. The reason this feature was removed is because good players were constantly tabbing out to the scoreboard to see if their score was going up while they weren't doing anything. So this was decided that the players were getting a little bit too much information from the scoreboard, so that feature was removed. This is kind of still doing that. It's giving you a lot of information on the scoreboard if you're a very experienced War Thunder player and also autistic. Well, that's kind of redundant. If you're a very experienced War Thunder player. I'm not saying this will come up every game or even most games, but it does feel like kind of a weird feature to add in my humble opinion. With that being said, you could already kind of use the War Thunder crew voices as a soft way to learn a second language, so I guess also using it as a geography lesson about what different flags look like is not completely out of the question. And our first new vehicle for the patch is the LVT M24, which is an American premium vehicle. It's essentially just an M24 turret on an LVT hull. And doing some testing, I'm not entirely certain why this is all the way down at 2.7. This seems excessively low for a vehicle this good. It honestly seems a little broken to have a fully stabilized American 75 this low in battle rating, especially because while the LVT isn't that fast, it is reasonably agile. The only thing that holds it back is its reverse gear, but that's just at a glance. I haven't actually played with it yet, so we'll wait and see. We also have a new squadron vehicle for USA. This is a helicopter, the AH-56A Cheyenne, and the AH-56A, despite looking really cool and unique and actually flying in a pretty interesting way for a helicopter, doesn't really have that compelling of a weapon suite. All you really get in terms of anti-tank missiles are a total of 6 ITOs, which is why it's so low in battle rating. Honestly, while I feel like the helicopter aficionados will really like it, for the average player, it's probably not going to do that much more than a basic Cobra, so It is certainly an interesting and unique aircraft, but ultimately pretty skippable for most players in my opinion. Next up for USA, we have a plane, the F-15C Golden Eagle, and this is basically dead on arrival. I don't really know what Gaijin we're expecting with this. It's basically just an F-15E with a beefed up radar, and that's really about it. The ordnance it carries is very similar in terms of air-to-air, much weaker in terms of air-to-ground than something like the F-15E. Honestly, if you just want to play the missile playstyle with a big radar, you might as well just run the F-15E. This offers very few advantages, so I don't really think it's that good. Next up for Germany, we have yet another vehicle that, in my humble opinion, is kind of dead on arrival, and that's the Tornado IDS SLE. And the big issue with the Tornado IDS SLE is that while it has a decent array of air-to-ground ordnance, the types of anti-aircraft systems it's going to fight on a regular basis outclass it so much that it's probably not going to get many chances to deliver it, and its air-to-air is pretty underwhelming as well. So overall, it seems like a very skippable aircraft. Our first new vehicle for the Soviet tech tree, and we have the T-3485 STP. This is a T-3485 with a stabilizer, and honestly for 6.3 I think this vehicle is pretty solid. The big thing with the stabilizer is it does actually get access to the K-shell for the T-3485's guns. That's pretty solid. On top of that, my experience with the T-34s in general is that one of the areas that holds them back a lot is their gun dynamics. Lower BR T-34s tend to be carried a bit by their armor, whereas the medium and high BRs can suffer a bit because their armor doesn't work as well and their guns are still a little bit awkward to get on target, but I feel like the T-35-84 STP is a pretty solid addition and should be pretty good, especially in the hands of a skilled player. Next up for Russia is the BTR-82AT, and this is at 9.0 with the 30mm cannon and also an anti-tank missile mounted on the top. And I was actually kind of confused as to why this was 9.0, but then I remember that the BTRs are kind of underpowered in terms of their engine and have pretty terrible reverse gears. So despite the fact that the cannon is stabilized, it's also one of the slower slower firing 30mm, so that doesn't help its case. The big advantage this vehicle has is that the missile is mounted so high up on the vehicle that if you actually use the controls to manually control the missile from the sight, then you can peek over obstacles very easily, but other than that, it's a pretty mediocre offering. That being said, it does at least offer a new wheeled vehicle for the Russian lineup, and Russian lineups have traditionally kind of hurt in the wheeled mobility area, at least in terms of top tier. Next up, we have a Russian aircraft, the Su-30 Mk2 AMV. This is actually a Venezuelan model of a Su-30, and this is a pretty decent air-to-air. Well, it does have active radar homing missiles, which is kind of weird for its battle rating, because typically if a vehicle at this battle rating has active radar homing, they have some kind of big disadvantage. They either have bad flight performance or something like that, whereas this doesn't really have that. It's still a Su-30, so it's still a bit of a missile bus, but ultimately it feels weird for this to be as low as it is in BR. While it does have a decent number of fire and forget air-to-ground munitions, all of them are optically guided and its targeting systems are pretty weak, so it's not the biggest threat in terms of the ground arena, but it can certainly get kills if it needs to. Overall, it feels like a pretty solid grinding aircraft that also has some applications once you're done grinding the air tree and you want to start to move on to ground forces. Next up for the UK, we actually have the Chieftain 900, and the big advantage this has, as the name implies, the 900 horsepower engine, which is noticeably beefier than the standard Chieftains. It's also supposed to have composites, but I'm not sure if they were actually put on this specific variant, because I know the prototype didn't have the composites installed, so I think they might be left out of the in-game model, but I'm not 100% on that. I haven't actually checked it out yet. With that being said, the single biggest weakness of basically the entire Chieftain family really is their power plant and how underpowered they are. Their hull armor is also pretty weak in general, but that's true of a lot of top tier MBTs. The power plant is really what holds them back, so having a Chieftain that simply has a beefier power plant is actually a pretty big upside. Next up is, well, all of the E model Apaches. For the UK, it's called the AH Mark II Apache. For everybody else, it's called the AH-64E. It's getting added to the UK, Japan, China, and France. Interestingly enough, the UK is the only one that's the actual operator of the Apache. For Japan, it's actually an Indonesian version. For China, it's a Taiwanese version, and for France, it's actually a Netherlands version. Now, there are some minor differences across these four variants of the E model Apache, but there are two things they all have in common. Number one, I could not find any one of them that at least currently have the LDIRCM system, and number two, all of them have the JAGA missile. So while on the surface they seem very similar to the American AH-64E, the lack of the LDIRCMs does make them noticeably worse in a lot of situations. That being said, it still does offer a brand new top tier helicopter to some nations that sorely needed it. Japan was the most desperately in need of one because all it had was essentially an A model Apache. This does replace the British AH Mark I, which honestly the AH Mark I with the Starstreaks was pretty dangerous, but this is certainly an upgrade in general. France, it's more of a side grade from the Tiger Hod Block 2 and Tiger Hop. With China though, China also got the upgraded Z10ME this update, so I'm not sure if China really needs the AH-64E, but it's there if the Chinese players want it. For the UK, you also have a Squadron Mosquito, and this one actually has a 4,000 pound bomb, but it also doesn't have any guns, offensive or defensive, so it is exclusively a bomber. I'm sure we will see people memeing with this in Ground RB, especially considering how popular the 5,000 pounds and the 12,000 pounds are. So it's an interesting squadron vehicle. It probably wouldn't be great as a tech tree edition, but I think those are the type of vehicles that are really nice for the squadron vehicle type role. Next up for UK, we have not one but two different Hawk 200s, and the Hawks are somewhat interesting because they're subsonic trainer aircraft, but because they have air-to-air missiles that are all aspect, they get put at a pretty high battle rating for their flight performance. This honestly reminded me the most of the Thai Alpha Jet TH, which is honestly at an awkwardly high battle rating. It can definitely get the occasional free kill while just vulturing up enemies that aren't paying attention, but it honestly doesn't hold that much of a candle to enemies in a straight fight, and I'm pretty sure looking at the Hawk 200's performance, they're going to be in a similar vein. The higher battle rating Hawk 200 actually has Skyflash missiles and a radar, which puts it even higher in battle rating, so that doesn't seem like that's going to be all that great. With that being said, they both do have the option to carry up to 4 B model Mavericks, so in terms of ground attackers, they're actually not bad. They're decent-ish airframes in the air-to-ground role, but I honestly, in AirRB, are probably going to be pretty painful to fly. Next up for China is a squadron vehicle. This is actually the Oplot M, which is a Pakistani version of a Ukrainian tank. This is very similar to the one in the Japanese tech tree. I didn't notice any differences offhand, but I haven't really spent that much time with either vehicle, so take that with a grain of salt. However, the Oplots do have noticeably better engines and transmissions than normal Russian tanks, along with a decent ERA spread. So in general, I do prefer them over many of the standard Russian tanks, but that's just my personal preference. I think it's an interesting addition to the Chinese tech tree, especially because it adds something the Chinese tech tree was lacking, and that is a tank with good ERA on the side. While most of the Chinese tanks do have pretty good ERA coverage over the front, they don't really have that lateral coverage like you get on more traditional Russian tanks, which the Oplot M does offer. So the Oplot M is likely going to be much better in a brawling capacity than many of the native Chinese designs. Next up, we have not one but two JH7s. We have the basic JH7 for China, and then we have the premium JH7A prototype. Now the base JA7 actually does have some pretty noticeable downgrades over the JH7A currently in the tech tree and the prototype, and that is it really doesn't have access to any meaningful guided air-to-ground. It's mostly just unguided air-to-ground with ballistic computers. So as a ground attacker, it's a little lackluster. Its missiles also aren't quite as good in AirRB. The prototype is, as far as I can tell, almost identical to the JH7A in the tech tree, so it is pretty good in terms of performance. Now, I have actually praised the JH7A multiple times on this channel because I really love flying it. In terms of the ground attack role, I find especially the prototype and the JH7A have really good air-to-ground ordnance for their battle rating and tend to perform quite well. On top of that, in AirRB, they're actually pretty fun too. They're remarkably maneuverable and have a decentish selection of missiles along with a pretty competent gun. While I definitely don't feel comfortable trying to plug a premium that I haven't personally tried, I will say that the JH7A in the tech tree is a personal favorite. Next up for Italy, we have a squadron vehicle, and this is the C-13 Tua, and the best way to describe this is just the American M901, but better. It's not on an M113 chassis, so it's generally more mobile, but it has the exact same missile system, so generally speaking, this is kind of just an upgrade over the classic Wally. In general, the Wally performs really well on maps with a lot of elevation and depression because it has 20 degrees of gun depression for the launcher, so you can easily just basically look almost straight down at opponents and take them out. So you really want maps like Attica or any map that really has a lot of elevated points that you can kind of poke the launcher over and look down on opponents. With that being said, it's also the type of vehicle that is generally pretty inflexible and not really applicable to every map, so it is the kind of vehicle that makes a good squadron vehicle. Next up, we have the MB326K. This is an Italian trainer. It has a decent selection of air-to-ground ordnance, doesn't really have any air-to-air missiles, it also doesn't have any guided ordnance or a ballistic computer, but in general, as an early jet and a strike aircraft, I think this is pretty solid for a ground support aircraft, and in general, a lot of these trainer-type aircraft tend to have pretty good roll characteristics and turn decently well, even if they aren't the fastest for a jet, so at least should be fun to fly, and also could provide some ground support for your Talon lineups around this battle rating. Next up, we have the star of the show, the EBRC Jaguar, the new French light tank for top tier, and it is so adorable that Gaijin put this thing at 11.0 because there is no way this vehicle is staying at 11.0. It has an autocannon with a Sabo stock actually that pens 140 millimeters of armor. It also has an auto tracker. It also has both a head and proxy fuse rounds for the gun, so it can shred planes and helicopters. On top of that, you have 4 spike missiles. The chassis is reasonably mobile. It does come with slat armor, but really the slat armor weighs it down so much you might as well not equip it. I do not have any idea how Gaijin think this is going to stay at 11.0. Maybe perhaps if this wasn't in the French tech tree, it might stay at 11.0, but in the French tech tree in particular, it's definitely going up to at least 11.3, 11.7 in my humble opinion. Next up for France, we have the supersonic prop aircraft, the Fokker D-23. There is currently a bug with the Fokker D-23 where it spawns and matches at Mach 2.5 for some reason, so it is pretty hilarious that it's technically the fastest aircraft in the game, at least until that bug gets sorted out. Overall, not a terribly impressive aircraft in any respects, but it does at least look funny, and currently is bugged in a way that is interesting. Next up for Sweden, we actually have an F-16AM. This time it's a Norwegian variant, and this, as far as I can tell, is basically identical to the Belgian variant. There might be some minor differences, but not so much that you'd really notice in most instances. One thing that I did notice was that because this is an F-16AM, it's honestly just better than anything else in the Swedish tech tree currently in the ground attack role, because you can carry a full suite of model Mavericks along with the targeting pod and air-to-air missiles, both long range and close range, which kind of outclasses both the Gripen and the F-18. Next up for Israel, we have the Bardelis 60mm HVMS, and this is just a 60mm cannon mounted on top of an M113. And taking this thing out in the test drive, the mobility isn't great, but at its battle rating, it's not too bad. The big thing I will say is that while the cannon has a lot of penetration, about 250, and it is a sabot, so it does have a nice flat trajectory, because it's such a small caliber sabot, it tends to do very anemic damage compared to at least a lot of the other normal sabots you might be used to. That being said, it is a fully stabilized sabot at this battle rating, which is pretty impressive. And our last vehicle for this update, we have the MD450B. This is an Uragan from the tech tree, but this time it's a premium vehicle, and honestly, it's not a bad vehicle. I really like the Uragans. I feel like they're pretty underrated French airframes. I use them a lot both in air-to-air and air-to-ground. They're pretty fun, they're pretty agile, they don't get up to speed or altitude really well, but once you are up to speed and altitude, they handle pretty well. As a nice mid-tier premium, it's not bad, but I wouldn't exactly be rushing out to get it. And that wraps up our little look today at the Spearhead update. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't really run into that many bugs with the Spearhead update, so atypically this has been a lot more technically stable than usual, but that doesn't really mean anything because usually updates are very unstable. That being said, I feel like the biggest thing about this update that had me scratching my head was the whole thing with the flag system. It just seems very unnecessary and almost designed to create more headaches for Gaijin, but whatever. They decided to do it, so they're the ones that have to deal with it. Aside from that, the free backup vehicles is great. I love the ability to remove the Tusk kit from the Abrams. I feel like the BA-11s on the Z10ME might be a mistake, but we'll have to wait and see because it's already destroyed a few of my lobbies, but at least Gaijin is taking some steps to make sure most nations have a half-decent top-tier attack helicopter, so that's something. Overall, for an end-of-the-year minor update, I think the Spearhead is perfectly fine. It's not bad, but it's not great. But those are just my thoughts on the matter. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of the Spearhead update. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you indifferent? I always love to hear from you guys. If you liked the video, you found it entertaining, a like and subscribe always helps out the channel. As always, danke bitte, tschüss.